Thank you guys for showing up. This is a nice turnout. I want to come together today for a couple of different reasons. I think I'm excited, even though that deep sigh didn't sound like a sign of excitement. Um, yeah, I'm excited to be here, and so some of what I do on a daily basis is really like I'm deeply entrenched in the ideas, kind of the scholarship, and the practice of mentoring. It's a really valuable and personal mission for me in a lot of ways, and a lot of that has to do with the intersections of my identity and my experience in schooling throughout. So when I was young, I was always good at school. So they give you those little standardized tests like the Iowas, you fill in the bubbles, and they tell you like you're in the 99th percentile and you get to show it to your buddies. I was always excited. And I remember very clearly and distinctly the differences, and so individualization is one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit as we move through some of the theory and the practice of mentoring and what I want you guys to take away about why it's important. But I remember very clearly that my mother really individualized her approach to me when it came to school success. And so I was the oldest of two younger brothers. I come from an interesting family background, so I have an older brother and an older sister. I have two younger brothers. My mother was in the military. We bounced all over the place. And I grew up as the oldest of three at home. And I would bring home tests to my mother and say, it's a math test, and I got a 98. And my mother would be like, where are the other 2 points? And I remember that both fondly and negatively in some ways. So at the time when I was experiencing it, a lot of it created animosity in me because my two younger brothers were not as lucky in terms of being good by the traditional measures of schooling. And so my next youngest brother was kind of like a BC student, and my baby brother was suffering from mild form of Asperger's, and so he was in and out of kind of developmental courses. And I remember distinctly, like it'd be not credit card. That's a Freudian slip because I do think of that in some of the ways for my younger brother. But we would bring home our report cards, and I would be like all excited, and A, and like where there are A pluses and E's, I'd have all those. And my mom would be like, good job, and kind of like pat me on the butt and send me on my way. My brother would come home with a nice alphabet soup, some A, some B, some C, and she would give him money. It was like $5 for an A, like $3 for a B, and $1 for a C. And I would look, I was like, how is that fair? And I realized that at the time, I didn't have the lexicon for it, but it was part of my mother's like management of kind of individualizing the approach. She was searching for anything that she could do to motivate and push my brother to achieve academically, and I didn't need that same push. And so while at the time I reflected on it as like, why? Like, I want money. And when you're 7, 8, 9, $5 seems like a lot of money. So if you have a report card full of $5, you're really feeling like you got cheated. But I think in some ways that my mother, in a lot of ways, was my first major academic mentor. Because her level of expectations was so high that it was expected. Achievement was expected. It wasn't out of the ordinary. It wasn't extraordinary. It was what she expected of me. She didn't expect anything less than A's and anything less than perfect scores. And so as I think about that and I reflect on it, it's one of the things that I try to be really careful about as I think about my career and the people that I'm charged with supporting. So I want to show you guys a couple of pictures to start. These are my children. So on the left, the small dictator that looks really sweet is, her name is Makaria. She is 6 going on 16, going on 35. And this was our recent adventure in puzzle building. And so my kids have been, one of the ways that I try to encourage them not to zone out with video games and tablets and all that on a regular basis is make them do things with their brains. So you can put together, there are all these different programs. So those of you who have children, I'm sure you're familiar, like ABC Mouse and all these different things that they can do. And your kids will turn into these little click zombies. And so I'm go outside and play, please. Or if you're gonna stay inside, instead of putting all your attention toward a screen, like why don't we work together to do something else? And so Makaria and my son, that's my 8-year-old on the right, Maximilian, they've taken to puzzles. That's what they want to do. And so we started with 50-piece puzzles. That's way too easy. They've moved on to 100. This is their first 200-piece puzzle, and the next one is going to be 300 pieces. But I think about the relationship between a parent and child, and kind of expanding on what I talked about with my mother as another really important form of mentoring. You know, there's a support that you provide, a sponsorship and exposure, or in my case, resources, because I have to buy these puzzles, and contributing to their development, watching them be successful. I feel the same level of excitement. I feel a greater level of investment in anything that they show me that they're interested in. And so as I think about my role as a parent, I think parent and mentor aren't really too far away from each other if you think about a lot of the fundamental roles. And so I'll talk about that a little bit too and expand some. And then this is my research team. So I am charged. I have a lot of people that work to keep me in line in different ways. You know, so my friends, I have a number of colleagues who, when they see my team, so we were recently, this was taken about 2 weeks ago. We were at the international conference, the American Educational Research Association, and my team just kind of is with me when I'm in conferences. I think of it almost like if you've ever seen like ducks or geese like across the street, like tick, 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 tick. And I've had so many different people be like, "Are you gonna socialize any guys anytime soon?" You know, like that's one of the first kind of questions that I get. But this is a combination of doctoral students. 2 of them at the top are students that have been on my research team for a year. Down in the center in the front is one of the students that used to work with me when I was a professor at Baruch College at the City University in New York system. Adriana is the next one over to the right, and she's one of my incoming doctoral students in the fall at Mizzou this year. And Sarah on the far right is one of my current doctoral students. And so I think of mentoring in terms of my commitment to my organization and my commitment to my job as well. And I don't think that there's any way that I would have ever thought about being a professor if I didn't see how valuable and important the role of mentor is. I was lucky because when I was a doctoral student, I didn't become a doctoral student to become a professor. I became a doctoral student to remove professional ceilings. So I actually know AJ from our time at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and my first job after my master's degree was a residence hall director. And those of you who, your college experience, you remember what it was like in the residence halls, it's still just as bad. And you know, so we're called and we're tasked to do all these different things. And part of my understanding of the role and like my excitement about starting in residence life is because when you start in residence life, you get to do a little bit of everything. There's conflict management, so roommates hate each other and they don't like the way each other's food smells. There's student conduct issues, you know, people like huge just marijuana clouds floating from under residence hall doors. There are all types of different ways that you get to show up and do conflict resolution. But one of the most important and valuable things for me was the leadership development aspect of it. And so when I was a residence hall director, I had a staff of 18 students. So 15 of them were RAs, so the typical, just what you remember. The ones, turn it down. Making sure that you turn in all the appropriate paperwork, making sure that you have keys. They're doing their on-duty rotations to kind of keep the building safe and happy. We had a role called a multicultural advocate, which was relatively novel, I found. I didn't realize that it was as novel as it is. And so these students were charged with trying to make sure that the climate for equity and diversity and inclusion was tended to intentionally. And so like they had a specific role. They did programming related to that. And then I also had program advisors. So part of the requirements of the living learning community that I worked in, we had students that were specifically tasked to work on big programs. We had a speaker series. We had people that, like artists that would come and live in residence for a week at a time and hang out with us. And I realized very quickly that the thing that I loved the most about my job was seeing each one of them grow. I had engineering students, I had chemistry students, I had like any major that you could imagine at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign on my staff. And so they had very different needs. But that mentoring piece, that pushing them, that trying to figure out what their needs were and to attend to those needs appropriately was really what was exciting to me. And I feel that same passion. When I was a doctoral student, I had a mentor that was just great. Everything I could possibly imagine that I would face as a faculty member, he gave me an opportunity to take part in as a graduate student. So, I mean, now as a faculty member, how many of you are faculty of some sort? Anybody? You just remember graduate school? um, you know, one of the things that was important for me, especially when I began to be interested in a faculty career, was this transition to, all right, well, how do you do it? And he was able to demystify it. My mentor was able to demystify it in such a way that when I graduated, I knew I was ready. And I feel like that's a lot of what your role is. And so when we think about mentoring in STEM, when we think about organizational health, when we think about the combination of those things and all the different ways that they intersect, what you're doing as mentors, as peers, as people that are trying to uplift others in the organization is kind of demystifying the process. Here's how you do it, here's how you go about it, here's how you should think about it. And so part of what I want to do with our time together today is give you some of the theoretical backdrop that helps me frame and understand mentoring. Then I'm going to share some of just what we know, what the evidence suggests about the role of mentoring in organizations. And then we're going to talk about some of the obstacles, some of the obstacles to mentoring. And I pay particular attention to intersections of identity in my mentoring work. And so I think one of the most dangerous unexamined claims around mentoring is related to race. So we make the assumption that same race mentors is the way to go. And in my research work, both in the collection of qualitative and quantitative data, some of the most damaging and dangerous mentoring relationships are actually where people are paired along a lot of different dimensions of identity. So a white heterosexual woman with a white heterosexual woman mentor could be having the worst time. And because we don't examine those issues, we're not doing anything to help overcome the obstacles and think about it. I'm also going to encourage you guys, because Paul gave me a little bit of speech before, and he's like, don't move from the podium, mirror your screen, don't step away, because if you do discussion questions too much, then the people that are webcasting are going to lose track. And I was like, okay, so I'll reorganize. So I'll do most of the talking at piece of it in the beginning. And then what I want to do is kind of begin a conversation that's going to continue over the next couple of days while I'm here in some of the other sessions that I'm tasked with. But I really want us to start thinking about what it means to mentor and like what it means to create the institutional, departmental, and interpersonal conditions where mentoring can really thrive and contribute what it can contribute to an organization. So the professor in me requires these kind of things. I feel like if somebody saw it and I didn't at least try to put together some outcomes, I would get caught up. But my hope is that at the conclusion of this, at the minimum, you guys are going to be able to describe why mentoring is important. The word important is egregiously overused. So anytime somebody is trying to make an argument, it's important to note, it's important to say, it's important to think. I don't think that important is a strong enough word for mentoring. And so I raised the ante a little bit, and I believe it's an imperative. If you want a healthy organization, I think mentoring is really an imperative. I want you to be conversational in some of the different theoretical approaches. And so I de-academified, if that's a word, I'll just create words on the fly. I try to make this as not academic as possible so that there aren't 1,000 references for you to write down. I'm happy to provide extensive kind of works cited and references for those of you who are interested in doing some additional reading and seeing where the ideas come from. But I want you to be discussing in some of the theories that are helping me kind of make the case for why mentoring is imperative and like what it has to offer to an organization. And then I want us to be able to apply what we've learned and like how we're thinking about this to this organization. Wherever you show up, whatever department you're from, the culture around mentoring and support matters. and it's connected to how you move through this organization. It's also connected in very meaningful ways to like how long you're going to remain at the organization. Even though I've seen some of the office windows here, and you couldn't get me out of a corner office that's above ground. Those are beautiful. And they put me in Elliot's office. I was like, it's living good. I like this. So some traditional definitions of mentoring, and so I wanted to draw on some scholarship from over the years because the definition of mentoring has grown and changed a lot. And so one of the definitions I pulled, a mentor is a high-ranking, influential member of your organization who has advanced experience and knowledge and who is committed to providing upward mobility and support to your career. About 9 years later, a mentor is a trusted and experienced supervisor or advisor who, by mutual consent, takes an active interest in the development and education of a younger, less experienced individual. In 2005, 6 years after that, mentor is someone whose advice you seek and value, or someone who offers you advice and suggestions which you believe are beneficial to your academic, career, or personal life. And then my favorite is from a comprehensive literature review last year, and it doesn't suffer from some of the definitional issues of the previous ones. And so like what I would have us do quickly is just as we go back through, do you guys notice any commonalities between these three older definitions? So power imbalance, I heard power imbalance. So like this idea of hierarchical, if the mentor doesn't really benefit, it has to be somebody that's higher up in the organization and the protege or the mentee. And we can talk about that. As a quick aside, I prefer the term mentee as the junior member of that type of dyad to protege. Protege is from French, it means to protect, and it kind of reinforces a lot of those hierarchical ideas. And it suggests that the mentee doesn't really have anything to offer to the mentor. And so language does matter, and we want to kind of think about that. But this idea that it's kind of one way, it's somebody older, it's somebody that knows more than you, somebody that has some organizational experience that's a little bit beyond yours. I want to challenge us to break those old molds of how we think about mentoring. And so I'll talk specifically about some of the ways that it can manifest itself differently and what the most recent scholarship suggests in terms of how we should be thinking about mentoring. But these old dyads, this like really old seasoned person and this young, fresh person who doesn't know anything, it does a lot to diminish the knowledge and the contribution of a person that's in a mentee role. So each of you have been new to an organization. And when you were new to that organization, you had something to offer, or else you wouldn't have got the job. And so we want to honor that something to offer. We want to expect that, both in the way that we engage on either side of the dyad for situations where we have a mentor-mentee situation, but also as we think about designing programs and changing cultures. So my favorite definition, just to return to this, is from W. Brad Johnson. It's a comprehensive literature review did in 2018. And notice he doesn't refer to like a mentor. It talks about mentoring. And so mentoring is a personal and reciprocal relationship in which a more experienced, usually older, but doesn't have to be, member of an organization acts as a guide, role model, teacher, and sponsor of a less experienced, usually younger, member of the organization. A mentor provides the mentee with knowledge, advice, counsel, challenge, and support in the mentee's pursuit of becoming a full member of a particular profession. This more robust definition gives us a lot of different directions to go, and it also gives us something to think about. We'll build on this in some meaningful ways, but what I want to bring specific attention to is this idea that that relationship is reciprocal. Done right, a mentoring relationship confers privileges to everybody that's involved in that relationship. And so as we think about our practices and pushing the way that we do this, that idea of mutuality really needs to be centered. I also want to highlight the idea, and they can sometimes, they appear at opposite ends of continuums in some student development literature, is this idea of challenge and support. Yeah. So if you're claiming to be a mentor and you're not pushing, you're not challenging, you're not trying to extend and stretch so that the skill development for the people that you're charged with working with becomes better, because a lot of the most important learning comes through dissonance. A lot of the most important learning comes through failure. If you're not pushing in that way, then you have to really think about whether you're doing a good job as a mentor. The other thing I really like about this definition is that it makes a lot of space. It makes a lot of space for people to Google map away from this talk. So the idea of profession, and I think that it's easy for me because my scholarly background is in organizational development, and the major organization that I study is colleges and universities. But what I found in my field work and my organizational studies that are outside is that institution, so like the idea of an institution, is really transferable. And so we could be thinking about an institution as a university, we could be thinking about an institution as NCAR, we could be thinking about any number of different organizations where people are forced to work together and they have to specialize and create subunits as an institution. And mentoring is valuable and important no matter what institution, no matter what profession. So one of the key pieces of mentoring, and one of the theoretical frameworks that I think is particularly important for us to think about, is this idea of socialization. And so the idea of socialization is really, from a theoretical standpoint, is really, if we simplify it, the process through which somebody becomes a member of a larger community. So whether you had an internship here, or whether you're like, oh, the mountains are really pretty, like, let me just see if they have jobs up there. There's a way that you became a member of this organization. And when you got here, whether you knew it or not, through your interpersonal interactions, through the way that you were advised, through the way that, and oftentimes there's this like discipline and punish piece that we don't think about too much, but some of the most important information that we have about how to be an organizational member often comes from when we get in trouble. So it isn't until you have that performance review and somebody's like, doesn't meet expectations. What? Why didn't you tell me before? And so, like, this idea of the transference of values, of skills, of attitudes, of norms, of knowledge, values being, how do we do things here? I know, for example, I have a number of close friends that are in investment banking and hedge funds. And so their organizational values are so different, than anything I've ever, So I remember one of my buddies had to back out of a birthday party. We're like, oh, where are you at? He's like, oh man, I'm on the cot. I'm like, what do you mean the cot? They have cots in their office so that they don't have to leave. They sleep there. And so if there's a major deal or a major acquisition or merger that's going on, they go downstairs to the cafeteria, get some food, come back upstairs, take little power naps on these cots, and then get up to make sure that they're awake for whatever the time zone they need to be operating in is. I was horrified. But I was like, that is not my organizational value. I don't ever want to be in an organization that expects me to spend the night on a cot and eat Captain Crunch out of a box. Even though that sounds like a really fun night for my kids. Skills, when we think about skills, what are the skills that you need to operate well within the space that you're operating in? And so skills manifest itself in a lot of different important ways. Some of the skills that we think about most readily are interpersonal skills. So it's easy in office gossip. And I'm sure you guys don't gossip because no way. But it's easy to have these commentaries on people's skills. And often the first set of skills that you think about are interpersonal skills. If you just don't like being around somebody, or they're awkward, or they're kind of mean, or they don't have, like I have a colleague right now who just has no filter. Like it's not possible. You'll be in a meeting, somebody will offer an idea, and you're like, well, that's dumb. And then be like, oh, I'm sorry. It's almost like this Tourette's without any emotional cover. And so part of skill development is how you interact with the people, but it's also making sure that you have the appropriate skills to do whatever your job is. And so understanding your job, understanding your role, somebody has to socialize you to that. Somebody has to help you understand the nuances. Somebody has to help you understand what are the techniques and what are the mechanisms when things go wrong. Who do I go to? Who solves this type of problem? For me, in the university setting, the most powerful, and this tends to transcend university settings, but a lot of the most powerful skills and knowledge about an organization are in the secretarial staff, like the administrative assistants. They know where all the bodies are buried. They've been there. They've seen people come and go, and they're still there. So when I was at the University of Illinois, our administrative offices are at our mailroom desk, and my beloved administrative person, her name was Kay, and she could tell you the entire history of the organization for like 10, 15 years back. And so anytime I get to a new organization, like I try to find Kay. Like, what's going on with pay? How come this person left? How was the person that was doing this job before me? Did you like them? Why? Why not? Like, those interviews can be so powerful and so important. And then there's this idea of norms. And so I shared, with the COD example, that's normal. Like, it's normal for them to spend the night. It's normal for them to not sleep. It's normal for people who work in investment banking and hedge funds to have to make arrangements for childcare at the last second. Because there's a possibility that if they're not present, that they're going to be eliminated from something that's very important. I tend to be of more of I like 9-to-5 organizations. Even better, 9 to 4. Like where it starts to be kind of a ghost town, you're looking around, like, oh. When people are surprised, like, oh, you're still here? But all those are norms. Those are things that are transmitted because people see. They see what's rewarded, they see what's valuable, they see what's important, they see who's connected to who. They see who's celebrated, they see who gets the opportunities. All of these are different forms of socialization. One of the models that is used to think about, so this is Weidman, Twale, and Stein. One of the models that they use to think about socialization forces us to think of it as an interactive process. And so like these confusing looking lines are just suggesting that everything is going on at the same time. So when we think about socialization from this perspective, it's easy to put yourself in the space of novice professional practitioners, to understand what a personal community looks like, to understand what a professional community looks like. And then perspective, even though this is based on students, I think that it's easy if we're thinking about organizations to just substitute prospective member of an organization. So a prospective hire, for example. At all times as a person, you're navigating through all these different communities. Like you don't really have a choice. When you leave work, you have people that rely on you, people that are going to check in on you, people that want to know where you're at and when you're getting off work and what's for dinner. And part of the socialization process is this movement from what you anticipate. So what am I going to get from this? What's going to happen if I enter this organization? What's going to happen if I'm hired here? All the formal mechanisms that are within the organization that set you straight, whether it's meetings with your supervisor, whether it's staff meetings from time to time, anything periodic that you need to do, any boxes that you need to check to make sure that you're actually doing your job. All the informal knowledge that's encoded in the way that you move through and between these different systems. So one of the things that I think is really valuable for me and helps as framing and an example of this, when I was a graduate student, I had a young son. So my son was, he's 8 now. He was born the year before I started my doctoral study. And so I would come home from research team meetings to a screaming infant and a fried wife who was like, take him. and I made the mistake. Oh, I love you. Oh, he just ate. Jesus, why did you tell me that earlier? But one of the things that was really valuable in my own socialization experience as a doctoral student was that I didn't have to choose between my communities. And so it became apparent, because childcare has always been an exorbitant expense, that it was difficult, because my wife at the time was also a doctoral student, for us to make decisions about like childcare when we both needed to do work. And so what my advisor did is he let me merge my personal and my professional community, like my student community. He used to let me bring my kids to research team meetings. And my son would be off in the corner, just elbow dropping stuff and like beating on things. But there was an ethos that developed where everybody would just redirect them. You know, whoever's closest, grab them, sit them on their lap, and we just get back to the meeting. And so it was one of the things that was like really powerful to me, because I was worried a lot about my personal identity. I didn't want to be eliminated from opportunities because I couldn't find childcare, but if I was forced to choose between my child and a research opportunity, I was going to choose my child every time. But being able to bring together those different spheres was really valuable and really important. And so some of the connections that we don't really think about are like, how are we merging these things? Do we know enough about each other as members of the organization? Do we know if somebody's parent is sick? Do we know if somebody's having childcare issues? Do we know if somebody's kid is acting up in school? Like, some of the ability to have these real conversations and to develop these real personal connections are part and parcel of mentoring, but they're also really important for organizational citizenship overall. Another theoretical kind of construct that really helps us think about the importance of mentoring has to do with psychosocial development theory. And those of you who are familiar, so Erik Erikson is probably like the biggest name in psychosocial development theory. But it's this idea that as we learn and we progress, one of the things that we want to do is give back. If you've heard there's a theory called self-determination theory, and it's been distilled now. So some of the popular authors are really good at taking like big complex theories and turning it into like small things. So Daniel Pink has taken self-determination theory and he's turned it into autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so like that's what everybody wants. That's what, as an individual, like these are needs, these are things that keep us motivated, that drive us to do the best that we can. This need for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I would suggest that all of those are part and parcel of this psychosocial development theory, because as we develop skills, we want to utilize those skills for good. We want to be good for being good's sake. Like you have a job, how many of you want to be good at your job? Like just show of hands. Yeah, pretty much, 100%. Yeah, like that. It usually goes like that. And so like that idea of mastery, is kind of baked in and directly connected to mentoring, because when you're a master, you're not recognizing the master unless other people see. Like, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, a lot of how we understand success and excellence is the judgment of other people. There are some things where you could just know, I don't know. Like every once in a while I'll pass the mirror and I'll be like, ooh, excellent. Yeah. But like, usually excellence is like socially situated. But part of real excellence and part of like that enduring excellence that really changes the culture and like pushes people to be better than they were before is the sharing of that mastery. So when you get great at something, you teach other people how to be great at it. And we'll talk about like how and why that's connected to organizational health a little bit more later. There's also this idea that as you develop skills and as you get good at things, like you really want to pay it forward, you want to pass that on. And that's what this idea of generativity is really about. So if you're being generative, you're utilizing everything that has happened to you along the way. So your passions, the things that get you excited, also the pitfalls and the mistakes that you've made, so that people who come behind you in the organization don't have to go through that. In the parlance of a rapper that I have a great deal of love for, Hove did that, so you ain't got to go through that. Like, there's this idea that if you're developing appropriately and you're developing as a healthy member of an organization and as a healthy human being, that eventually the need to create and prompt and promote mastery for others, to help people and guide their purpose, while still remaining autonomous, is going to be valuable. There's also really strong, and to me, the business literature is kind of the place where I get most excited about when I'm reading, because I think that they do a really good job of kind of thinking about what mentoring really means. And career development theory, so Helen Cram's work is really influential. She has a book from '85 that is kind of the gold standard. Anybody that writes about this stuff kind of has to cite that. And there's a really powerful simplification of the role of mentors in her work. And it's to offer two forms of support. So psychosocial support and career support. And these are, to me, worth exploding a little bit. So psychosocial support really refers to the aspects of a relationship that make somebody feel like they can do it. You know? So how are you making somebody feel like they're competent, that they can identify as a member of a community? You know? So I think, to me, one of the applications of this to everyday life. How many of you played sports at any point in your life career? So when somebody says, correctly identifies you as an athlete of your sport, like, oh, you look like a basketball player, feels good. Well, yeah, you're right. I used to hit a couple threes. I mean, I don't get that because I'm built like a football player, even though basketball was my sport, but yeah, I digress. But that identity, that sense of connection to what you do and what you excel at, what you're good at, and the community that you operate within. So for sports, whether it's an individual sport or a collective sport, part of you being good at that sport is that development of an identity. I am I am a golfer. I am a basketball player. I am a synchronized swimmer. Some of that, when that becomes a part of your identity and you feel like you belong to that community, you're able to move and operate within that community in a way that is freeing. So right now, my daughter, tyrant that she is a competitive dancer, which I didn't know that there was competitive dance at the age of 6, and I didn't know how expensive it was, or else I might have made some other suggestions in terms, you sure you don't just want a soccer ball? But she's been dancing since she was 3. And I still remember, because as a professor, I always had the more flexible schedule of me and my partner. I was like, oh, you want to dance? So we're going to dance. I'll take her to the lessons. And before, it was just a hobby. It was something to do. It was like an extracurricular. It's a way to expand the mind, get them moving around. Again, just not staring at screens all the time. But I got to watch as it became a part of her identity. And she's a dancer now. I wish I'm that dad that record. So much video footage and so many pictures of her participating in this community. And it's been powerful to watch how, if somebody's a dancer, they immediately have kinship. She knows the vocabulary. There's a jargon that you don't even realize that your 6-year-old has learned. And so even to me, as a person who played sports, so I used to box, I played basketball, and I'm really into watching soccer because it's the most painful sport ever. Your fortunes it's so evil. But that rush of excitement and that pain. And so when you hear somebody that understands, so I root for Manchester City, for example, in the English Premier League. And I'll go places and I'll have on a jersey or I'll have on some kind of paraphernalia. And if people don't throw fruit at me like Fozzie from Muppet Babies, then there's often a conversation that can spark. People that speak your language, people that know the players, people that are excited about the league, people that want to talk about Champions League and all the different competitions. And in the same way, within an organization, part of the role of a mentor is to help somebody develop an identity as a member of that organization. You're a member of NCAR. You belong here. You are somebody that contributes to the mission of this organization. You are somebody that matters. And so that's really what this psychosocial support piece is about. Specific manifestations of that are role modeling. And so role modeling is really powerful and effective for a number of reasons. when we're talking about the development of efficacy, and so efficacy is somebody's confidence in their ability to do something. And so it's domain specific, meaning that basketball efficacy doesn't translate to like math efficacy per se. But when you're in a professional function, you want to feel efficacious. You want to feel like you have all the skills necessary to do the job that you need to do. Role modeling is one of the most important ways to offer people that sense that they can do things. If you see somebody operating in an organization and you feel like, oh, like that's somebody I can learn from, or that's somebody I feel connected to, role modeling can be really important for those positive reasons. But role modeling also has a dark side that I do think that people do a lot and they don't always acknowledge. And sometimes it's, if that person can do this, then I definitely can do it. And so like our ability and like our need for social comparison is one of the things that helps us navigate through society and navigate through life, but it's also something that helps us navigate through organizations. And role modeling is really important. So if you want somebody to be a really strong member, citizen of an organization, putting them in front of and exposing them to people who do that in an excellent way is really important. Acceptance and affirmation, sense of belonging, helping people develop that feeling that they're valued members of a community. That's another really important part of psychosocial support. And then counseling. You know, everybody's had that day where you don't want to be here. Everybody's had that office door that they've needed to close. Let me tell you about this. And part of the psychosocial support that really helps in a mentoring relationship is knowing that you have people that you can go to for counseling, knowing that you have people you can go to if you're having a hard time, believing that there aren't going to be any negative repercussions if you have to admit vulnerability because you don't know what to do in a certain situation. And so some of the ways that that manifests itself, and that it becomes particularly important, and we'll circle back to this a little bit later, is that sometimes it's not the things that are said, it's the things that are left unsaid that do the most damage to an organization. You know, if somebody's really struggling and they don't feel comfortable asking for help for any reason, they're really compromising themselves and their performance, but they're also compromising the organization. And so we have to think about culturally, what are we doing to encourage help-seeking behavior? Like, what are we doing to make people feel like they can go and they can ask for the help that they need, no matter what the situation is, large or small? And then, if you're lucky, a mentor can also be a friend. There are some people who do an excellent job at performing a lot of the mentoring functions without ever really being friends. You know, like, I can think of countless people that I would consider mentors who I can reach out to and I can text and I can get in touch with if I have anything going on with my career. But if I was like, hey, let's get a drink, they'd be like, no. It's still valuable, still important. Maybe the more robust and like happy and exciting and free beer involved relationship for me would be if they would come out for that beer. But this idea of friendship, a mentor doesn't always have to be a friend, but a strong mentoring relationship that's persistent is very likely going to result in a friendship. And so thinking about, even in the nascent stages of developing a mentoring relationship, what it's going to look like moving forward, and whether or not it's something that you want to continue to invest in is really powerful. The other function is really career support, and I think that that's part of what I want us to really focus on. And so anything that helps somebody advance professionally is also really involved in mentoring. And so like psychosocial support, you can do it, you got this, we believe in you, let's be friends, let's hang out. But career support is a little more structured, and it needs to be a lot more intentional. And so if you're supporting somebody's career, you need to push them, you need to challenge them, you need to expose them to challenging assignments, you need to support them when things get difficult, but you also need to expose them. Expose them to the different aspects of the organization. Expose them to the different functions of the job that people might not anticipate. And particularly because oftentimes a person in the mentor role has been there before and they've done a lot of the things before, expose them to the questions that you wish you would have known to ask when you got to the organization. Like, how could you have made your first couple of months better? How could you have thought differently? How could you have saved yourself headaches if you had been exposed to just some of the nuances of what goes on within your organization? Another really important part of this career advancement piece for a mentor is the idea of visibility. And so appreciation is really valuable. I think it's something that's easy for people to forget about sometimes, particularly in like a capitalist society where the ultimate form of appreciation often for us is like our check. Like, well, you got paid, didn't you? So somebody must appreciate this. But those words go a long way. And some of the signs of appreciation that are most important to think about are not, the fact that your direct deposit came through, but the idea that people know that you're doing good work. So when I asked the question earlier about everybody's interest in being good at their job, everybody's like, yes. But what if nobody knew you were good at your job? Like, would you feel as good about being great at it then? Would you be as invested in being great at it then? And so some of what we need to push on is this idea of visibility. Like, how are we recognizing excellence? How are we letting people know that we see them? That we see the good work that they're doing. We see their contributions. We see the ways that they're growing. We see the ways that they're progressing. Coaching, and I'm glad that it shows up here. And so I think sometimes people get mentoring confused with some other things. So like they get mentoring confused with advising, or they get mentoring confused with coaching. I think that mentoring subsumed, like the umbrella of mentoring, like coaching and advising are kind of underneath that. And so part of coaching is like helping somebody with specific skills or like to work through specific work situations. And so when I think about a coach, and again, sports analogies are really easy, but we could even take it to any space where you feel like you would need somebody who has expertise to help you refine your performance. That's part of how you help somebody advance in their career too. What are the fundamental skills that I need to be excellent at this job? And because most career pathing is about mastering the function that you're in before you move up and help people that are in the position that you were formerly in do a good job. What do I need to know? What do I need to be exposed to? What skills do I need to develop so that I can take that next step? And so coaching is really pushing on that. We talked a little bit about challenging assignments already, but challenge is really important. It's really important for individual health. It's really important for the mentoring relationship, because if somebody doesn't feel challenged, it's easy for them to get bored. Bad employees are usually people that are disengaged for one reason or another. It could be because they feel like they work really hard and the other people around them aren't working very hard. It could be because the work that they're doing isn't being celebrated appropriately. But this idea of challenge, like pushing people to continue to develop skills, is really important, because then you get that continued engagement, you get that excitement. I was excited, so I got to talk and spend a little bit of time with Elliot earlier today, and he was telling me his background, and he's like, well, I come from meteorology, and I don't know too much about computer science, but I'm teaching myself. And I was like, one, because I was an information systems major in undergrad, and I hate coding. Two, because like to be in an organization that offers support for you to take on a role where you can teach yourself a function that you otherwise haven't been exposed to, and that there's patience and there's support around that, like that's mentoring. Like that's a beautiful example. And because he's developing these skills, now he's able to contribute to this organization in a way that he otherwise wasn't able to before. And that's really powerful. The other piece that I think is important to kind of push for here is the ideas of protection and advocacy and their connection to each other. And so if you're wise and you have mentors, often some of the most important forms of protection that a mentor is going to offer is they're going to tell you what not to do. Like, no, don't be on that committee. Don't go on that trip. Don't take on 4 mentees, like maybe only take on 1. And again, it's the use of that advanced experience and knowledge to help you avoid pitfalls and things that could get you trapped. And it's also protection in terms of if something is going wrong, particularly if somebody's higher up in an organization than you and they hear your name come up in not so positive lights, for example, because of a misstep or a failure or just an accident. Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes throughout. That they're going to protect you, that they're going to speak for you. They're going to say, hey, okay, maybe Susie dropped the ball on this one, but here's the long record of other really strong work that they've done, and let's push them again. Let's give them another opportunity. And so one of the most important things about, thank you so much. One of the most important things about that protection is giving people an opportunity to fail productively. We're so afraid, and I think there are a whole lot of different directions that we could go in terms of why this is a social and societal issue. And at lunch today, we're kind of talking about some of it, which is like this idea of like rugged individualism and meritocracy, and I'm only as good as my work. But we have to protect people from themselves sometimes. Because in the quest to be right, in the quest to not need help, we develop some really maladaptive coping strategies. And a mentor is helping protect you not only from organizational climate, not only from any of the pitfalls of the work, but also in some ways from yourself, which requires a mentor to know you well enough to let you know, like, nah, that's not the framework that I would approach that with. Or like, maybe you shouldn't think about it that way. Let's change that. And that to me is directly connected to advocacy. And so a mentor needs to advocate for you. They need to advocate so that you have more opportunities, so that you can engage in professional development, so that you can travel, so that you can get supervisory experience, so that you can develop in the ways that are going to make you a better member of the organization across the board. People with advocates get promoted. There's a long line of empirical work about that, and you need only go to any of your organizational histories throughout your life. Like the people that are silent get very little. The people that either speak very loudly or have people speak on their behalf get a lot of the opportunities. And so the role of advocacy becomes particularly important when you start to pair it with some of the other dimensions of identity, particularly in organizations where there's a slant or where there's kind of less in terms of diversity. And so like I think I was in the cafeteria today, and so I was like looking around the cafeteria, and I was sitting with Elliot, and I was like, two black dudes. And then I came in, and my man over here to the left, I was like, three black dudes. And so like I realized that I become the Count from Sesame Street like every time I go into like an organization, because I'm 1, 2. But like that sense that, okay, I'm in this space, and I can recognize very quickly, both by the pictures on the wall and the people that are in the cafeteria and like the different interactions, okay, there isn't a whole lot of diversity here. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that it's a bad organization. It doesn't mean that there aren't great possibilities for people to be supported. And in fact, as I shared with my Elliot story from earlier, like I see he's getting some really powerful like mentoring and support within the organization. But it does mean that advocacy could be compromised a little bit. And so oftentimes some of the most problematic things come from unintentional slights. So this isn't a talk on microaggressions, so I'm not gonna go too far down that path. But in an organization, when there's a specific culture and there's an expectation and there are ideas about doing things, there are certain ideas about what leadership looks like. And so one of the exercises that I do when I'm working with younger populations, so I did a workshop for the second graders in my son's class. And it's about like science identity and the development of a science identity at a young age. And I asked them, like, we blank the screen, put everything away, take out a blank piece of paper and your set of crayons. And what does a scientist look like? What do you think they drew? Yeah. So I heard lab coat, I heard old white guy. I heard, yeah, exactly. Yeah, like sometimes it was like the little Back to the Future guy with the crazy hair. They almost always had spectacles, which I found interesting, and they were like fighting over the peach crayon to do the skin color. And so I'm like standing there. I'm a social scientist. I have a PhD. Like, you're not even gonna try? Like, not one? But there are a lot of messages. There are a lot of unexamined messages that we have about like what a scientist looks like, what a leader looks like. And so if I would challenge you, if you have kids or if you have access to other like communities, do that. Like, what does a scientist look like? What does a president look like? You know, what does a soldier look like? You know, there are a lot of identities that we've ascribed to these roles and to these words that we don't ever deal with. And so it's not surprising when you come to an organization and like you see the climate survey and it's like, oh, we're a scientific organization and women and people of color feel like they don't fit here. And it's like, okay, well, why? Because some of that training, some of that socialization is happening as soon as they're forming words, as soon as they can draw pictures. You know, they have ideas. And if we're never challenging those ideas, if we're never struggling together to like push back against those ideas, then they just remain. And so this advocacy piece is important because part of advocacy is realizing that there might be some things that you don't have to think about that are worth advocating for. There might be some portions of your identity or your social address, or even some of the ways we develop a lot of really strong coping mechanisms, right? So I do like the gender balance in this room. You know, there are a lot of women scientists here, which is nice because that's not always the case in a lot of organizations that I work with. But a lot of you women scientists have just learned how to deal with a man's world of science. Like you've developed your strategies like, all right, this person's talking to me crazy, or this person is trying to attack my competence, but I'm not gonna lower myself. I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna do what I need to do. I've seen it, I've heard it. The participants in my interview studies talk about it. The focus groups that I run when we do organizational audits talk about it. But the problem is you're so used to doing it that it's like almost autopilot. And women, people of color, anybody that feels out of place. And so now one of the really important and interesting things I think that is happening because of the political climate in our country, and so I'm in a lot of university spaces, but in a lot of places where people consider themselves intelligent, like now one of the identities, one of the invisible identities that people want to talk about, but don't really want to talk about, who are being made to feel marginalized are conservatives. So if you have conservative political ideologies, you feel like you can't speak up. You feel like you can't say what you're thinking. You feel like you're automatically going to be branded as a racist or a xenophobe. And it's interesting watching like how society changes what we can and can't talk about, or what we feel like we have to deal with and what we feel like we don't have to deal with. And so some of the strategies that people have utilized to cope with difference, to cope with the idea that, you know, I didn't have a single one of my third graders, there were 22 students in the class, or second graders rather, there were 22 students in the class. Not one of them drew a woman. About 17 of them were future women. And that blew my mind even more than kind of the race piece of it. Like just the intersection of like, oh, like what is a woman scientist? And so if you're a woman and you're in your computer science class and you're used to looking around to the left and looking around to the right and like maybe there's one other woman, but you love it and you're good at it and you feel efficacious and you hopefully had some means of support that got you through, you just start to accept that as normal. And like our acceptance of what we think is normal is kind of part and parcel of the persistent and pernicious gaps in achievement around diversity. So sometimes this advocacy piece is about helping us realize and like really hear the voices of the people that are in the room in a way that if we're not intentional about it, we won't, because they've already figured out how to survive. They've already figured out how to persist, how to exist, how to feel successful, how to be excellent, even while recognizing the issues. There's another kind of theoretical model that I enjoy, and it kind of puts mentoring in phases. And so it's a 4-phase model that sees mentoring in 4 steps, and it's initiation, cultivation, separation, and redefinition. And so in the initiation phase, and this is another thing to think about as we undergird this conversation with notions of equity and diversity, it requires this process of mutual recognition. So I know for me, if I scroll back, because this is screen mirroring. This isn't me being able to hide what I'm doing on my screen. But if I scroll back to my the picture of my research team, I was sure that when I became a doctoral level educator that there were going to be black men that were going to come and study with me. Because when I was looking for programs in my field of expertise, there are basically 3 black male professors in the country, and they were at some of the most prestigious schools. And if you wanted to work with a black male professor, you had to go to one of those 3 schools that was really hard to get into, or you weren't going to do it. And so when I got on the other side, and I was like, huh, now there's 4 schools, bitch. I was like, where the applications at? The people that were coming for me, I guess maybe because I'm still relatively junior in my career, weren't that. And so like the idea of mutual recognition, I had to very quickly reframe my ideas about mutual recognition, because it wasn't about my identity, it was about my research program. I study sense of belonging, I study mentoring, I study student socialization, and a lot of the people, essentially all of the people that are attracted to my research program right now in my first 2 years at Mizzou have been women. And some women of color, some white women, but women nonetheless. And this idea, I offer that to offer this idea that we need to examine too, because sometimes traditional mentor-protege relationships, those that are like unexamined and that can be dangerous if they remain unexamined, are about this idea of mutual recognition, So you see somebody, and often because like all of the psychological things that we've developed over the years to survive in groups, is we see somebody that's like us, that reminds us of us, that's like part of our tribe. And we recognize them, and we recognize some of ourselves in them, and so now we want to take them under our wing. We have to be careful about the initiation of mentor-mentee relationships. Even while we're being careful, though, there are some parts of it that are pretty much always going to be there. If you have a choice in the matter as the mentee, even though I don't like protege, I guess I didn't catch that one while I was changing the color of all the fonts. Part of what you want, particularly if you have any volition in the selection of who's going to be serving as your mentor, is you want to respect them. Like, you want somebody who you think does a good job. You want somebody that you could see as a role model, somebody that like eventually like, I want to be like that person. Maybe I don't want to be that person, because some people can go a little too far with that. But I want to be like that person. I see their contribution. So for me, one of the reasons that I'm a professor is because I wanted to be like my doctoral advisor. I could never be him. He's like very little. He's like 4'11". He wears like baby Gap clothes. But one of the things that I saw from him all the time was he infused so much energy and passion and excitement in his work, and he could make anybody, because of how established he was in the field, he could make anybody feel smart. So, this even happened to me, so I'll give a personal anecdote. My wife was ahead of me in her doctoral work, so she finished coursework, and then I started my doctoral work. And I used to tell her all the time, like, you're so smart, and you're amazing, and I'm so proud of you, and look, you made 2 people, and you're still crushing it at school. Compliments galore. My advisor was like, wow, you're really smart, huh? You should join my research team. It's like I never said anything ever. She's just like, oh my God, he likes me. He really likes me. He believes in me. But like that power to change somebody's trajectory, that power to make somebody think differently about who they are and what they could become, that's really important. And it's part of this piece. Because like the respect that you have for a peer or a partner is just not the same. Even if it's still respect, it's not the same as somebody who's reached prominence. somebody that you look up to, somebody who's been doing what you aspire to do well for a long time. We need to trouble this idea, so in the initiation model too, about the mentor. I think there's a particularly problematic word there. What do you guys think it is? Right, so like, what does deserve mean? Yeah, like how do we come up with deserve?
Hold on, I can't tell who's speaking.
Yeah, so I heard, no, actually, yeah, because I can hear you. I'll repeat into the microphone for those that are not with us. So you don't even have to try for it, right? Like, you just deserve it. Like, there's some inherent feature or characteristic that you have that makes you worthy. Like, how do you come up with deserves in your life, right? If we had to think about that, and I want to push us just for a second. Yeah, like, how do we come up with deserves?
I would put forth that you can come up with it in this situation just from an appreciation of every person's humanity.
That's a very positive way to come up with it. I mean, I do like that. I do like that. Yeah. So this idea that deserves comes from an appreciation of everyone's humanity. I actually like starting there. So like, let's build there, because that's a positive starting point, which usually does not happen with this. How do you distinguish between people that deserve mentorship and that don't, if you're recognizing everybody as a human? Like, how do you make decisions about?
I think those, in this respect, that would deserve mentoring, maybe it might appear first to like be those that are eager and those that are like willing to learn, and those that like put forth that attitude that like very visibly, they like, everyone might be eager, but the ones that are like, hey, I really want to mentor, I really respect you, those I think will get the most attention first.
Yeah, that's a great one. So I want to sit there for a little bit. I think that's a really powerful and important aspect of identity that we don't always think about. And so some of it is like introversion versus extroversion. So extroverts get to eat first because they speak up. And so somebody could be eager, somebody could be skilled, somebody could be talented, but you can't tell either. And some of this is, if we talk about some of the maladaptive strategies that people come up with to cope with their oppressive structures that they have to navigate, some of that introversion could come from the fact that somebody feels oppressed, or they feel like they can't be themselves in a situation, that they can't trust. Like, oh, I've been burned by people that remind me of this situation, or in organizations or in spaces that remind me of this one, so I'm going to protect myself. And in that protection, they don't know that unwittingly they're having ideas developed about them that are going to bar them from opportunities. And so I think that this is a really powerful kind of reflection that we have to think about too, and when and how we develop mentoring relationships, and the role of the mentor in reaching out. Because if it's a truly reciprocal relationship, the onus shouldn't be completely on the person that's going to be the mentee. The mentor has to do some things, to offer some vulnerability, to show some humanity, to be somebody that deserves to have a mentee, right? And so even the idea that deserves in a lot of the theoretical models that we operate on, it doesn't appear as a word that ever describes the person that's going to be the recipient of the mentoring. But because of the importance of the role of a mentor, shouldn't they deserve, even if the word deserve is problematic, like, shouldn't we be holding them accountable to a certain extent for their role in initiating these relationships? The other possible answer for a problematic word is worth. Right? So, worthiness, like the idea, the concept of worthiness, and like whether or not somebody is worthy of your attention, whether or not somebody is worthy of your mentoring, whether somebody is worthy of your advocacy and support. I think that sometimes worthiness can be conflated with other things that people don't want to say, like discomfort. You know, like, I could speak up in this situation, or I could try to support this person, but that might not be so comfortable for me. So, my favorite comedian of all time is Dave Chappelle, and like, I always think about it when I'm doing trainings around equity and diversity. It's like, and then you ask yourself the most important question: what is going to happen to me? And in these relationship dyads, sometimes we fail to realize that some of the way that we construct this idea of deserving attention and like worth investing in, and sometimes it's protective of us. So if I have a doctoral student, I just went through my first, this is my second year at Mizzou, so it's the first wave of people that are actually, like, they've seen me at Mizzou for a while, and they're like, oh, like, I want to come and I want to study with you. And I got to sit through the whole PhD process, you know, of admissions. And there are vast differences in the qualifications and readiness of some people to pursue doctoral study. And so I'm forced to make decisions about who deserves to get in, who deserves to work with me, who's worth investing in. And all I have to go by are standardized test scores and written products like personal statements and resumes. And so even, I can't claim, and I hope you guys understand this, even though this is something that I study and that I ponder and I think about really deeply, it doesn't mean that I've found ways to be perfect. You know, our hope is to not be perfect, but to be more intentional in the way that we go about it, and push to change some of the systems so that we don't get stuck in the patterns and the bad habits that have us where we are in a lot of different organizations. But like, even that's a difficult thing that I have to make a decision about. Like, do I take this student who's already publishing and presented at places and who already has some of the skills so that they can hit the ground running? Or do I take this other student who's like maybe a bit of a long shot? And yeah, I'm supremely confident in myself if you guys haven't figured that out yet. So maybe I take on this other student who nobody else wants them, but watch what I can do. That decision is one fraught with, you know, the possibility of getting it wrong. But in all of our professional lives, we're forced to make decisions in low information environments. And so part of us being more intentional about mentoring too is, you know, recognizing and like troubling when we're being forced to make decisions in these low information environments, where on paper, two people look functionally the same, but one is a minoritized candidate or a woman, and one is not. Being forced to think about what it means for culture, what it means for hiring, what it means for community. Spending the time pushing ourselves to learn more and to not go all the time with what we know works. Because sometimes the safe decision can be the wrong decision, because if you keep making the safe decision, you're just going to reproduce what you already have. After the initiation phase, the cultivation phase is really like this development place where the mentorship relationship really begins to blossom. And so it's really about learning. You need to know somebody to mentor them well. You need to understand. I mean, like for me, one of the things that I do, one of the exercises that I do with my advisees when they come to Mizzou is I ask them a very pointed question. And this is one that you guys feel free to steal this and use it. What difficulties from your childhood are you still trying to overcome as an adult? And so this reflection question if taken seriously, is magically illuminating. So I've shared personally the story that I started with you guys. And I'd say that the moral of that story for me as a child was underappreciation. Like, look, I'm awesome, and I don't get paid for being awesome. And other people get paid for being mediocre. You know? And if it's related to family issues, if there was a divorce, if there was a major event, if somebody died, if there were any forms of abuse, like having a window into learning what works really means learning the people. You know? If you come from a disciplinarian background, so I told you my mother was in the Air Force. She's exactly what you would think, a single black mother in the Air Force. Like ROTC belt. Strict. Negotiation wasn't allowed. And so it tickles me to no end. I watch my mom and my daughter are best friends. And my daughter will try to negotiate anything. I'll be like, hey, baby, it's bedtime. It's 8. How about 8:05, Poppy? No, bedtime. Like 8:15? And like, I remember, I wouldn't even dare ask those questions to my mom. Like that would, yeah. And so like, I watch my daughter do it, and I'm like, what is this? Like, who is this woman that you've unlocked that's entertained by all these requests for negotiation? And because what my mom said went. She didn't have time or energy. She was working multiple jobs. I get it now. Like, as an adult, there are a lot of things you look back on and you're like, man, my mom was mean. And you'd be like, whew, I get it. like, I'm about to kick my own kids down the flight of stairs. I think that this piece that we think about, for me, like the military background, like having a disciplinarian, having somebody who didn't take no for an answer, who you didn't negotiate with, who said something one time, and if it wasn't accomplished after that one time, there were likely going to be physical ramifications in the form of whatever she could grab, like whatever was closest. Hangers, belts. The slotted spoon in the kitchen is a dangerous weapon. So for those of you, I wish corporal punishment on nobody, and I try very hard not to do that to my children. But I get it. I get it. But I remember that, and that affects me. You know, it affects me. I'm very coachable. So like in athletic situations, because I was used to do it at home, like somebody just tell me what to do. Tell me what to do, I'll do it. Tell me the play, I'll run it. And so I always respond well to that in work situations. So don't dance and don't give me so much freedom that I need to figure out what to do. Like, just tell me what to do so I can do it. And if I need to be creative, tell me how to be creative. That's the way I came up. And so there are pieces of it where like, okay, here, you need to know this about me. You need to know this about me. Punctuality is another thing. I was never allowed to be late to anything. My mother was chronically late to everything. And so now with reflection, I can be like, okay, you were working multiple jobs and there were 3 of us and we were eating everything in sight, and I get it. But when I was growing up, all I remember is she's not here yet. You know, so I'm at a basketball game, I'm like looking out into the crowd. I was like, you know, there's Matt's dad, there's Ryan's mom. You know, where's my mom? She said she was coming. She's not here yet. And, you know, we had 8-minute quarters in the younger school time before we graduated to 10-minute. And it'd be like 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter. I'm like either subbed out or like not even playing anymore, either for good reasons or bad reasons. Either we're killing them or we're getting blown out. That's usually the way that it went my young basketball days. And that's when my mother would arrive. And so like part of that, the manifestation of that in my adult life is I hate being late. I hate being late. Because I think about how it made me feel when people that were important to me weren't there. And I judge lateness very harshly. So if I'm running my research team, you know, there are 8 of us. And so if you're 5 minutes late, you've wasted 40 minutes. Like, that everybody here has their time compromised by the fact that you're not here. Sharing that and being able to offer that context, along with the vulnerability, because to tell the story appropriately requires me to reveal things about my childhood that I still deal with. That's how my students learn. That's how they learn about me. Mutual vulnerability is really valuable for this learning process. Being willing to reveal yourself, and also to think critically about yourself, because a lot of us like don't. So if you have a good job and you have a good relationship, you know, by like typical measures, you're not really challenged to think of like what's wrong with you, unless you have like a good therapy relationship, you know, with a counselor. And you're like, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. But everybody has their buttons. Everybody has the things where they're like, are you talking to me? If we don't think about those things, we can't share them. If we don't think about where they come from, we can't develop strategies to help people work with us well. And so part of that learning process does come with the development of that vulnerability so that you can share honestly and openly. You can share the opportunities for improvement that you see in yourself. And you can also invite, both mentors and mentees need to do this. Like you can invite people to participate in either your healing or the meeting of your preferences to the best of ability. You know, I have a student who's chronically late. And so we did that whole story, and she was like, wow, I hear you. I'm still probably gonna be late. And I was like, like at least now we can manage expectations. Like we have a baseline from which to work. You know, understanding strengths is also really valuable in terms of organizing effort. And so some of what a mentor needs to recognize is what people are good at and what they're not so good at. I'm horrible at email. It's one of the first things I admit to my students. And the ones that are in my classes and that work with me is why I give everybody my cell phone number. Like an unread text message will bother me. An unread email. Join the other 1,000. At any time between Gmail and my work email account, if something isn't high priority, and part of my development of what's high priority is if something's high priority, you can probably get to me. So if you're my department chair, you know my cell phone number. If you're my student and we have a deadline coming up, you know my cell phone number. If you're in any of my classes, you have my cell phone number. And so it's easy for me because in order to do my job, in order to produce like research work, you know, to conduct interviews, to analyze data sets, you know, to write, I have to protect my time in a very structured way. And what that usually means for me to make significant progress on a daily basis is that there needs to be like 4 or 5 hours where I don't have access to anything. No notifications, no phone buzzing. But for some reason, I just can't. I got to look at text messages. I'm like, who was that? Who was that? Bing. Okay. And so that's one of the tools that I give students who interact with me. AJ knows. I was like, there's probably 4 or 5 emails you haven't looked at. Text message. And so some of the understanding of strengths is also about the development of preferences. And so if you recognize what somebody's strong at and what they do well, you can also begin to understand what they prefer to do, like how they prefer to contribute to an organization, how they prefer to be talked to, how they prefer to receive feedback. And feedback is a really important piece of it for me too, because I think that's one of the areas where I've had to improve the most in my own like leadership and mentoring capabilities. Because again, military background, I'm used to direct feedback. Sports background, direct feedback. Like usually cursing, what the are you doing? And so, yeah, just give me direct feedback so I can do whatever needs to be done differently. Because of the power differentials, and so you guys like rightly identified some of the power differentials that are in traditional mentoring, protege, like mentor-mentee relationships, people don't feel comfortable with like sending feedback up the chain all the time. And some of what you have to do as the mentor or the more senior person in a relationship is give people permission to offer feedback in a way that's going to help you improve the quality of the interaction and the relationship between both of you. So that people have opportunity and space to state their preferences. Like, hey, I don't need you to yell at me. I don't need you to be that direct. Say, give me the bad news first, give me the good news second, or give me the good news first, give me the bad news second. Part of that learning and part of that push has to be about how do we work together in the best way possible so that you continue to develop, so that you continue to get what you need from this relationship. If you're doing all those things, like, that's how you optimize the relationship. And so optimize, science people love optimize. Like, I love optimize too. Like, how do we get the best of this? Like, what do I do to make you feel the most supported? You know, where do you need me to show up? Who do you want to meet? What can I do to connect you to? What can I help you read? What resources can I buy for you? What about my framework and my understanding of the world can I find a way to transfer to you so that yours is enhanced? In order to push, and I mean, push is it's a part of it, but like, this is where I think the idea of protection isn't really a bad thing. Because if you're like pushing somebody and you're promoting them and you're showing that you're invested in them and that you believe in their ability, sometimes that protection piece is important to revisit. Protect them from bad decisions. Protect them from actors that you know are not as benevolent as they seem. Protect them from overwork. Protect them from their own conception of what they're contributing. For me in my own direct space, one of the most important things for me to protect the students that work with me from is their sense that they're not doing anything. Which, as their mentor and as their supervisor, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I couldn't have done this. But there's this persistent underrating of contribution, by the students that I work with. It's like, I just feel like I'm not getting anything done. It was like, we published 2 papers and presented at 2 international conferences, and we're finishing a book chapter. What do you mean? But if we don't unearth those scripts, because like, people could be doing a great job, but they're telling themselves they're not good enough. People could be doing a great job, but they're telling themselves they're not contributing as much as they should. We can't protect them from themselves unless we provide venues to have those conversations about how they're making sense of their contribution, how they're making sense of the way that they're navigating the organization. Eventually, if things are going well, a mentor and a mentee will separate. But it's a loving separation. I almost think of it as a release of doves. That's the way I like to think of it. So some of it is like the structure changes. So for me, the example is easy because if I'm doing a good job with my doctoral students, eventually they're going to graduate and they're going to go take on positions in policy organizations and faculty positions. They're going to go somewhere else. They're not going to be available to me. I'm not going to be able to be like, hey, seems like you're down and things weren't going well in the research team meeting. Let's go grab a beer and talk about, course selection. So like structurally, they're just not going to be under your purview because if you're developing in the ways that you should be, they're likely going to move up or they're going to move out. Separation can be hard, especially when you have a great mentor. And so like, this is when organizationally we want to think about things like succession planning. So if you have somebody who really excels as a mentor, but then when the people go to other organizations or other parts of the organization and they no longer are under the purview or the care of that mentor, they start to burn out or they're not having the same type of experience. Some of that could just be like the psychological loss of a person that they enjoy working with. How many of you have a coworker that you like miss? you used to work with, and you're like, oh man, this person was dope. Yeah, like that. It's similar for a mentor. You know, like I had, I love you, AJ. I had coworkers. So when I was at the University of Illinois, was probably the best professional space for me in terms of my colleagues, because most of my colleagues were my peers. We were about the same age. We were about the same life stage. You know, I was having kids. People were thinking about having kids. People were married. There was a lot of connection in that way. And so when I left the protection of that community, I felt ripped away in a way that I did not expect. Because to rebuild that, it wasn't even possible. The space that I occupied when I moved to Ohio State to do my PhD, it wasn't even possible to rebuild that. I think in some ways, like, the preparation for this kind of psychological angst and anxiety comes with the preparation, the intentional preparation of the mentor and the protege. Like, what is our relationship going to look like when you leave? I'm still here because, for the most part, when done right, mentoring is usually a lifetime relationship. You know, somebody that you would really consider your mentor, somebody that you would use that word, because I think of the word mentor as an honorific. You know, if I say that somebody's my mentor, that's saying a lot about who they are and what they mean to me. Are you thinking critically, and like, are you having open, real conversations about what it means when you move on, or what it means when you move up? You know, that's a really valuable part of this, and it eases the pain of the separation. But ultimately, like, you should want it. And so, like, the release of doves metaphor for me is about, like, yeah, we want, like, to me, releasing doves at a wedding or, like, you know, any kind of event where they do it, it's kind of like, you know, I always loved in, like, Disney movies where there was a ship and they had, like, the glass of champagne. It's like, go, get out there to sea. And the parents are usually on the ship and they're going to die. But, yeah, Disney movies are harsh to parents, man. I hate that. But we should want that. Like, the person that's in the mentee position should really want to develop independence. They should want to have gotten enough skills that they feel comfortable moving off from under the protection, you know, of the mentor. And the mentor should scaffold that by slowly and intentionally decreasing their involvement. You know, so for me with writing, if I'm one of the skills that my doctoral students need to develop, no matter what career that they're going to go into, is they have to be good scholarly writers. And so good scholarly writing, there are a lot of different parts of it, but like synthesizing literature, being able to read 6 or 7 different things and make sense of it and turn the 300 pages you read into a nice tight paragraph with a couple of references. Like, that's a really important and valuable skill. And so when they first start doing it, I track changes, and it's not pretty. There's a lot of. I tried to change my track changes color to blue instead of red, because red looks super intimidating, and it's like, bloody sea of paper. But part of my decrease in involvement is, as soon as I start to see that they're developing the skills, even if they're not using language that I would prefer, or like, that's not how I would have said it, but I guess that's okay. Like, that's the decrease in involvement, the fallback to, like, you are developing your own voice. You are starting to understand this, and because you can do this well, I can offer more freedom. I don't have to handhold, I don't have to micromanage, I don't have to say, hey, how about you review exactly these 10 articles? Like, I can let you be an independent researcher. You can go and do that yourself. You can come back and report. Like, that structured decrease in involvement is something that mentors that show up in any organization should also be thinking about too. Like, okay, I need you to know that I'm here and I have your back and I support you as you develop, but as soon as I see that you have the skills, I'm going to back away and let you flourish to the best of my ability. And then the final phase, and it's this important thing, is redefinition. And like, redefinition is, what's the outcome of the evolutionary relationship? If you've gone through all the phases, you've initiated a quality relationship, you've cultivated it by learning about each other and by supporting each other in a number of different ways. You've started the plan for the separation. When you actually separate, you need to redefine that relationship. Redefinition of the relationship really is about the evolution of you into a full professional if you're the mentee, and the mentor is about the evolution of you into somebody that's still there, still connected, still supportive, still an advocate, but the way that you support is different. And so one of the major benefits of mentoring, and I'll go through some of them in a little bit, is this idea that a mentor knows a protege really well. And like they can speak, if they're doing their job, they can speak really well on your behalf. So the first thing I always think about when you deal with students is references. You know, or if you deal with organizations, it's references. Like, I need a job. Who can I trust to say really nice things about me, even if they're a bit embellished? Mentor. That should be the first person you think about. The person that occupies that role, who knows you well, who knows the things that you do well, who understands your areas for improvement, who can speak passionately and confidently in a way that recognizes your wholeness as a person, but that doesn't bar you or eliminate you from contention for opportunities. Like, that's really, really powerful. And so part of that is making sure that you put in the appropriate scaffolding here too. You know, so no mentor, and some of you I'm sure are already in this role in your careers, both because of the formal mentoring that goes on to UCAR, but also because as you get older and you're more developed, you just have people that feel connected to you and that want to connect with you. No mentor likes to be hit up out of nowhere. Like, hey, I need a recommendation tomorrow. Happens all the time. But part of the reason it happens is because we're not intentional about developing expectations around contact. You know, so like, how do we stay in touch? If it's been a year, 2 years, 3 years since we were last working closely with each other, whether it's a student, faculty, whether it's a supervisor, who's still in your mentoring network, you know, whether it's somebody that you worked with who helped stimulate your ambition to pursue some professional opportunity, it's very difficult for you to offer each other that mutual support if you haven't created thoughtful and meaningful ways to stay in contact with each other. And so as we think about redefinition, we should really be thinking about, all right, now we are something new. You're not under my direct supervision. You're not under my direct purview on a daily basis. But that doesn't mean that I don't care. And that doesn't mean that I don't need information about where you are and what you're doing. I also kind of want to share a little bit. And so typically mentoring conversations, because a lot of the most powerful mentoring does happen one-on-one. The people that we think about, if I say, everybody close your eyes and think of your mentor, like how many of you come up with more than one? Like how many have more than one face flash? That's good. That's about half. I want to talk about some of the different roles. And so like there's a graphic that I really enjoy that helps us think about the different ways that a mentor shows up and kind of the hierarchy to mentoring roles. But I also want to return to this idea of like having multiple mentors. And that's what is referred to as network mentoring. So this is the hierarchy, the mentoring hierarchy. I really enjoy this because it helps us think about mentoring in terms of intent and involvement. And so intent is just intention. Like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to offer? And involvement is really about the amount of energy, like the physical, the social, the psychological energy that you're investing in the relationship. And so if the intent is development, you know, the involvement can be relatively low. Oh, no. And so role models, peers, supporters. And I think one of the things that's important here is that it acknowledges that peers can be important mentors. You know, sometimes the person to your left and the person to your right is the most important person that you can learn from. Like, you can socialize yourself because if you're freaking out and a person who has the same commitments and ideas and deadlines that you do is like, we got this. Like, it's a very easy way for you to be like, maybe I'm taking this a little bit too seriously. Or maybe they're not taking it seriously enough. But either way, those social relationships help us kind of think about and situate ourselves in an important mentor relational role. A teacher or coach is a level up, and so a teacher has to be a little bit more involved than a peer. A teacher and a coach has to know more about what you're doing so that they can offer that expertise. Next level up is a counselor, advisor, or a guide. And so again, this is a higher level of involvement. It's a higher level of expertise. Somebody that's counseling you isn't just showing you technically how to do something. They're also kind of holding your hand. And like, to me, I say, they're giving you a little bit of game about like how to approach this. Like, oh, maybe you should think about this way. Nah, don't do that. don't do it that way. That's not a good idea. Next up is a sponsor or benefactor. And so sponsorship is a really underrated thing. And so like some of us have, I like to think of sponsorship in a couple of different ways. So part of sponsorship is in the like little niceties of the day. And so I remember there's a faculty member in the psychology department when I was a doctoral student who would like always buy beer. Like all you had to do, hey, I just need to talk about something. And he'd be like, oh, let's go to Bar X around the corner from campus. And what I didn't realize at the time was that was a really like valuable form of sponsorship. Like he was a benefactor in a way because not only was I able to get free beer, like I was also able to get all the advice that came with it. And like the relaxation of being in a social setting where I really felt comfortable and I felt like I could say exactly what needed to be said. And I could interact in a way that felt authentic. That's really powerful. But I also think about sponsor and benefactor in another way. I also think about sponsor and benefactor in another way. And like the way that I think about sponsor and benefactor for me and one of the manifestations of in my own life was I was a broke doctoral student with 2 kids. And I remember I didn't get the job, so let me, not bury the lead. But when I was on the faculty job market, I got an interview at the University of Georgia. That was my first opportunity to like get out there and talk about my dissertation and hopefully get a job. And I remember being filled with just anxiety because as soon as I heard about it, I was like, yes! Like that means my materials are good enough to get me at a Research 1 type institution and have an opportunity to get this job. But then in the letter inviting me to campus was, you pay for everything and we'll reimburse you. And I was like, my stipend was like $1,600 a month. My rent was like $800 a month. Had baby, wife. I had no idea. And I remember going to my advisor's office. I had already talked myself out of this being good news because I was broke. But I went to my advisor's office and I was like, hey, got an interview opportunity on campus at University of Georgia. Like, can you help me like think about like strategizing ways to like figure out how to pay for the ticket to get down there? He's like, sit down. And he just handed me his credit card. And the weight, and he never asked for it back, to his credit. I think I've been like quietly waiting for him to. But yeah, like the weight that was lifted off my shoulders immediately because like it's something that was like causing me a great deal of anxiety, but I didn't have to worry about it because he was in a position financially. And as a mentor and as a supporter of me and my career, that he didn't even think twice. I didn't have to negotiate. I didn't even ask. He just, go, take it. And so sponsor and benefactor is one of the things. And so this manifests itself in organizations in terms of professional development. Like, oh, I normally go to this conference, but like, hey, mentee, why don't you go this year? Normally I have like this much in professional development. I know in some of the organizations that I've worked with, like they have bonus structures. And so the supervisor will be able to offer bonuses to the rest of the team based on everybody's performance. And I've seen in some of the best organizations with like through the roof belonging and like sense of mentorship where the person who manages the bonuses will give theirs up to make sure that everybody on the team gets it. And so like that, being in the position to offer sponsorship and being willing to offer it is important. Moving up, patron protector, and then finally at the top, mentor. And so this is hierarchical, and the idea should be that the higher you go, like it's assumed that you're doing all of the things below. And so like a mentor is doing all of this, like a true mentor. They're role modeling. They're supporting you as a peer. They're offering that psychosocial support. They're teaching. They're coaching. They're guiding. They're offering counsel. They're a benefactor in the ways that they have access and resources to be so. They're protecting you. They're mentoring. Quickly, because I feel like we're running out of time. Yeah. The evidence of the benefits of mentoring is overwhelming. And like, I'm excited because we'll get to go in some depth in some of the other talks that I'm doing, because we're going to talk specifically about like organizational health and the role there. We're going to talk about mentoring students and like what that looks like, especially along like intersections of the diversity. But mentoring has benefits for everybody, but evidence-based, empirical, over and over and over again in the literature, for mentees, benefits are academic performance. And so academic performance is interesting because it, to me, suggests like a school type of setting. And so when you're in school settings, it's really about retention and persistence. Like, what's going on so that somebody continues to take class until they get a degree? Or what's going on that somebody continues to come to class until they finish high school? But this also is directly connected to organizations, and the evidence is just as strong. And so organizational performance, like how well somebody does, has a lot to do with whether or not they're mentored. And people who identify having a mentor tend to perform their job functions better, whether they're in academic setting or institutional work settings. People who have good mentors are more productive in general. And some of this is actually connected to their ability to communicate how and why they're being productive. So a good mentor is going to teach you ways to tell your story. You know, what is it you say you do here? Like that old Office Space line. Like, a mentor is going to help you develop that. Professional skill development, by offering challenging assignments, by pushing you to do things differently. Networking, and networking is another one, introducing you to people. So even within an organization, hey, you should really meet Bob. Hey, you should really meet Karen. Why? Because they know that exposing you to these people is going to offer you different routes, offer you different opportunities to move up and move through. It's also, in terms of these, for organizational health, income level and rate of promotion is directly and consistently tied to mentoring. And so one of the roles of a mentor is telling you when to get out. And so if you're in a situation where you're stagnant in terms of your earning power and that's not okay for you, like, a good mentor is going to be able to offer you some provision and some guidance. They're also going to be able to utilize their network and their resources to tell you other places that you can go. If you get stuck, if you feel like you can't move up and you have to move out, mentoring is really valuable for that. It also helps with reducing stress. And so somebody who has a mentor, somebody that they can go to, somebody that they know has their back, is less likely to feel stress, less likely to feel like they don't know what they're doing, or they don't know what their contribution or their role is in a larger organization, because a part of that development of the personal relationship helps them make sense of that. For mentors, mentoring is connected to personal satisfaction, fulfillment. And so some of that fulfillment is really just your sense that you're contributing something. You know, if we go back to the autonomy, mastery, and purpose model, knowing that you're creating organizational citizens that make your organization stronger is one of the most powerful things that you can do as a mentor, as a supervisor, as somebody who's more senior in an organization. It helps with networking. And like, I think one of the really cool ones is it forces people to stay current. So if you know, I'm so far away from coding anything at this point, thank goodness, because like, what, a semicolon this whole time? I remember those days. But your motivation to remain current, like, is really bolstered by having new students and like having new people who are doing things in a completely different way than you did. And you want to be able to speak their language, and you want to have that, like, that synergy and that creative energy that comes from people pushing each other to be great in new ways. And being a good mentor is also good for your reputation. You know, if you get tapped and you get recognized as somebody who's really talented at developing people, you're going to get more opportunities to develop people, and you're going to get more talented people that are going to hear through the grapevine that you're good at it, that are going to want to come work with you. And so there are a lot of benefits that flow to the mentor. And then I want us to also, we think a lot about the individual level contributions, but we also need to think about the institutional contributions. And this is why I would offer that mentoring is an imperative. People that are in institutions and organizations that value mentoring have more productive employees. Those employees have a stronger commitment to the organization. There's lower turnover, and you guys know it's way easier to keep somebody that knows how to do their job than it is to hire somebody new and train them to do that job. And so reducing turnover is one of the really important ones. Organizational citizenship. People that are in institutions and organizations that have a strong mentoring culture have people that are more likely to want to contribute positively to that culture. If you're used to seeing your coworkers step up, help people out, sacrifice the extra time and energy if necessary, then you're more likely to do that too. This idea of paying it forward, this is how you change culture. And sometimes the most important and powerful cultural changes come from a single individual who's showing other people how to do it right. Look how this person shows up for their people. Look how they show up for their staff. Look how invested they are in the success of the people that they supervise. You can change a culture with excellence in a very small pocket of that organization. Institutions that promote that culture have a lot more institutional loyalty. And so if you think about, do any of you know people that work at Google? I have a couple of colleagues that do. And they're like, Googler. Like, that idea that they're being well mentored and well supported, at least the ones I've talked to. I haven't met somebody that's had a bad experience just yet, but I'm sure they exist. I'll try to find them. But like loyalty to the brand, loyalty to the idea, you want that. You want people to speak highly of your organization. You want people to be like, oh, where do you work? So I know, like, for me, I'm jealous of the mountain views that you guys have here, but I also know that AJ loves working here. And I'm like, so what are you gonna do next? She's like, work here. You know. That's loyalty, and that comes from having a good experience, and that's easily transmitted throughout an organization. And then good mentoring leads to good mentoring. Like, when people are well mentored, there's statistical and anecdotal evidence that when people have good mentors, they're more likely to become good mentors, because they have the role models, they know how to do it, and they know how to improve on the model. So here are all the ways that this person mentored me great. Here are all the things that I would have done better. Let me improve on it the next time through. And so my bold claim, and one that is going to infuse a lot of what we do over the next couple of days, is that deliberate and intentional mentoring. And you'll notice that I've called to deliberate action and intentionality throughout, is one of the most important commitments that an organization can make, period, but like particularly to the satisfaction and fulfillment of the people that occupy that organization. Beyond the time that we have, but we will go into this deeper, so those of you who have opportunity to come to other talks, we'll get into these a lot deeper. But there are a lot of obstacles to good mentoring, and those obstacles appear at all levels. Sometimes it's the institution itself, sometimes it's like the units or the departments that make up. So you could have an organization where these people are happy, these people are happy, these people are happy, but like this problem area or this problem silo is where things aren't happening. And sometimes it's at the individual level. We opt into or opt out of opportunities and like relationships. We make decisions about worthiness and deserving. And so we're gonna trouble some of those when we go deeper into like what it means for organizations and what it means for students specifically. We're also gonna go deeper on some of the big issues that I was excited to talk about coming here, which is specific obstacles to mentoring, but those that don't always get enough airtime. So sometimes it's culture. It could be organizational culture. It could be culture just based on the expectations. It could be culture about how we interact with each other. It could be race and racism, both implicitly and explicitly, the ways that we are silent around issues that we know exist. And it doesn't always have to be in these walls. So I know that walking around UCAR, I'm like, yeah, everybody seems nice and happy, but Boulder is still out there, and I've been pulled over for driving while black in Boulder, and I've spent a whole time, 6 days in Boulder, driving the speed limit the whole time. And so sometimes you're not trying to inoculate the people that you're mentoring from what goes on within the walls. Like, sometimes it's about the larger community and the fact that like you're not going to be able to protect everybody from everything, but that there are more structured and thoughtful responses to help people feel like they belong and that they're valued members of a community. We'll talk about gender, and skill gaps and aspiration gaps. So sometimes mentoring is problematic because people don't have the skills to like enter an organization, or they perceive that they don't have the skills, and so recruiting people across difference is difficult. But like aspirationally, it could be that we want the type of organization that is great at mentoring, that is connected to everybody, where everybody, no matter where they show up in terms of their social address, feels good. But we can't close those gaps without intentional practice. So look forward to hopefully catching some of you guys later. And I'm always open for questions. I'll hang out for after, but I've been shooed off.